Well, well, maybe I should just say that my plates are coming soon. I had a little accident with cracks, so I'm remaking them.
I too have some. I think
You
I have
too?
a milky
No.
myself.
Oh, I missed that one. You haven't seen it yet, Chris. And Stephanie, thanks. We're waiting for yours, and it'll be great when everyone's just has worked so hard, and we really appreciate it. Okay, so I think we're gonna get started for today's Lunch and Learn. I wanna welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. We are celebrating our new exhibition, 100 Years, 100 Women. We have some great artists who are participating here with us today. We have Charlotte Hodes, McCusker, Sue Tirrell, Jennifer Ling Datchuk, Mallory Wetherill, and Syd Carpenter. We are also celebrating, the show opened on August 18th, which was the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which granted most women in the US the right to vote. And while we are celebrating and acknowledging the really hard work that was done by many different people in order to make that happen, we also want to acknowledge that not all women were permitted to vote at that moment in time, and that much work was done in the interim years, and there is still much work to be done to finally achieve equity in our country. And to that end, I just want to also acknowledge that the Clay Studio and myself in Philadelphia are on traditional Lenape land. So I want to say thank you, and just want to make sure we always acknowledge that important fact. I'm Jennifer Zwilling. I am the curator of artistic programs at the Clay Studio. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm just really so excited about this exhibition. We started thinking about it probably more than a year ago. We invited 50 artists to each choose 2 women who inspire them to celebrate on plates. And we have those plates up in our gallery over at the Clay Studio. And as also, they're all available to see and look at and even purchase on our website. So I hope everybody who isn't here in person can go check them out. If you want to come into the Clay Studio, we are safely reopened on a limited capacity basis. So you have to wear a mask, and our limit in the gallery is 4 people, but it hasn't been a problem. We have had visitors, but always in very small numbers. So that's great. We are excited by all the rest of the artists from the show who are joining us today. There are lots, and we're going to have at least 2 more lunch and learns to make sure that we have an opportunity for any of these artists to speak if they want to. Next week, the lunch and learn is also going to include a wikithon. So that means that we, and I can share this link towards the end of our program today. There's a form where you can go in and enter a woman, can be an artist or any other woman who you feel really should be on Wikipedia, but isn't. And we are going to be live uploading those. We'll be doing just very short, they call them stub entries, just to make sure that there's something there. And then we can all go in if we choose and edit in the future. But I happen to know that there are people who really deserve to be on Wikipedia who aren't. So we're gonna fix that to a certain extent anyway. Just as always, I appreciate everyone being here. We've been trying since the pandemic to create free programming that's available to continue to build our community and support our community. And to that end, if you are interested in becoming a member of the Clay Studio, that's a great way to support us. If you want to make a donation, that is also very welcome. I'm going to pretend that put my PBS hat on and say, this programming is free. Keep making it free by helping us provide it. So we're going to get started, and I am going to share my screen with you. There we go. And we're just gonna dive right in and start with Syd Carpenter. Oh, but she just walked away.
She's right back.
Okay, she's right back. Hold on, I'm gonna introduce you to Syd Carpenter. Just very brief introductions for each artist so they can talk more about themselves. Syd is professor of studio art at Swarthmore College. She earned her BFA and MFA from Temple University's Tyler School of Art, and her work can be found in numerous public and private collections. And she's the person who I put on my Wikipedia list first.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. Oh, and this is just a little glimpse for everyone before we start of the title wall and some of the work in the show. And there is one of Syd's pieces. Oh, I'm sorry, one sec more. Just if everyone else can just mute themselves while Syd is talking, and then put any questions into the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Syd, go ahead.
Okay, well, first I want to thank Jennifer for inviting me to participate in this. I was talking to her yesterday and to the other artists, and realized that getting the opportunity to make these objects has actually stoked some new fires in me about the kinds of things that I want to make. So that's really good, you know. So the two plates that I have submitted digress from the actual requirements of the project. Rather than selecting two women, I have chosen to create two kind of commemorative plates that evoke the whole idea of a woman's space, and particularly spaces that have to do with rural African American farms. So I have a narrative that I want to just describe that to bring to you so that you can get a sense of how these objects occur. So in 2012, I and a friend, Helen Ramsaran, a sculptor living in Midtown Manhattan, met in the Atlanta, Georgia airport. We rented a car with a GPS system and began a self-directed tour through Georgia, South Carolina, and the Gullah Islands. The goal was to visit farms and gardens tended by African Americans, most descendants of people who had stayed on the land during the era of Jim Crow and the Great Migration. I wanted to see who was still on ancestral land, and therefore they had become official keepers of the home place. And that's the title of these two pieces, Home Place 1 and 2. So the term home place can reference both actual and imagined spaces that we return to when all else is denied. For many, this can be a house in a town or city, or for many African Americans, a farm long ago abandoned and still occupied by tenacious family members. Many of the farms and gardens Helen and I visited were anchored by women. Their names were Helen Fields, who's a member of the Southern African American Organic Farmers Network, and she passionately is committed to passing her knowledge of organic farming on to the next generation. Another farm we visited was run by Lori Mason, who's a beekeeper and breeder of exotic chickens. Sarah Reynolds, who raised organic vegetables to be consumed at her restaurant and distributed to the local elderly community, also organized and conducted organic gardening classes for young people. There was also Mary Curley, the herbalist who grew all her herbs in her densely gardened backyard. And then Cassandra Williams, the vintner, whose father, David Williams, had figured out how to get their muscadine grapes to fruit twice in a season. So when I returned to my studio, I began creating a series of sculptural landscapes titled for the people who tended them. An earlier series included sculptures titled Mary Lou Furcron, Henrietta Royal, and Anna Mae Edwards. This earlier series came out of research that I did that included a 1987 to 1990 anthropological study of 47 African-American farms in Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, which was conducted by Richard Westmacott, a professor of environmental design at the University of Georgia. So my trips and this visit to these farms was necessary because I needed myself to have a firsthand encounter with the spaces and the people who would be documented in my sculpture. So when I was invited to make two plates about women who have made an impact because of their commitment to place, family, and community, I knew I'd have to make plates representing those rural home places tended by these women, including the buildings, the fences, the produce, and gardens. I wasn't interested in the fragility implied by a traditional plate, nor the preciousness, but I intended the robust, tactile durability that these women stood for. Hence the scale, the weight, the earthen colors. These are plates meant to withstand the elements. They represent not only stamina, but refuge. Someone remarked on the mass and the weight of the plates as if this could be a deterrent or liability. The plates do not require some thought. The plates do require some thought on how best to lift them. That's true. They're big, they're heavy. But their weight is not inconsistent with being a sculpture, which is not concerned with function. Although in the shape of a plate or bowl, their weight and configuration assures the viewer that no one is going to serve cake on them. But more importantly, and I made them more fragile, had I made them more fragile, it would have been a contradiction of what these women represent in a physical world, a world in which their bodies are testimony to their ability to sustain and recover. The history of African Americans on the land is a story of our ability to recover, and in doing so, create a legacy of sustainable, productive beauty. So the plates are titled Home Place rather than individual names and faces, because they commemorate so many. I couldn't identify just two. They are freestanding and sturdy, like the Southern women I met, and have inspired my work to this day. And certainly it's going to be the catalyst for new work as I move forward with this series that was generated by this assignment and getting me to think about how I could represent these spaces and these women. And I did want to emphasize, as Jennifer pointed out, that the women that I identified, their ancestors, their predecessors, they didn't benefit from the 19th Amendment. It would be decades later that we would actually have a Voting Rights Act. And so I wanted to actually emphasize and point that out in my description and the reason for these objects. So, thank you.
Thanks, Syd. I was on mute, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. So I didn't go through your pictures while you were talking, so I just want to show everyone that this is the second one, and each one has two views, which is important because they're so complex and really look completely different from each angle. And then
I should say that taking sculptural objects, I think that I have some other slides that show some of the ones that are more sculptural and non-functional. These pieces are generally anywhere from 4.5 feet, maybe a little bit taller than that. And they represent some of the farms that we visited when we were driving through the South. So this is Pearl Fryer. The preceding one was Rashid Nouri, whose farm, he does urban farming in Atlanta, Georgia. Pearl Fryers is famous for his topiary sculptures that he makes in his garden. He's become kind of a star in all of this because of the sculpture that he has created using plants. In his town, he has basically put his town on the map by making these. I don't know if there are any other yet. So this is Mary Howard, who we visited in Monticello, Georgia. And yeah, I was going through these spaces, going through these landscapes, taking photographs of things that I saw, and then bringing them back and making these constructions out of metal and clay, and just representing these places. And when all of them are together, they create a garden. The configuration of all of them is such that the bases, like for instance, this bench, this metal bench would represent the roots. Then in the middle, there's a stem. And then on top, there would be what I refer to as a fruit or the flower, which is the clay component of them. All of which hopefully will end up out of doors. and living outside and sprouting lichens and plants and weeds all over them. So that ultimately is where I want this group of about 10 sculptures to reside. They're going to be exhibited at the Michener Museum in a one-person show that's coming up and opening in October. So I hope all of you will get an opportunity to get up there and see that.
Oh, that's exciting. Congratulations for that. Will that be outside or inside?
They will be inside.
Oh, well. Maybe next time.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Syd. That was lovely, and I feel your words are so poetic. Thank you for sharing with us. We are going to move to Charlotte Hodes, who is joining us from London, or near London, I think. Charlotte earned her painting degree at the Slade School of Art. She is a professor of fine art at London College of Fashion and has been awarded numerous grants and prizes, including the Jerwood Drawing Prize in 2006. She has been a guest resident at many places around the world, including at the Clay Studio, which is how I am lucky enough to know her. And we will, oops. Oh no, I did the wrong order because I forgot the alphabet. Hold on a second, everybody. I apologize to Charlotte because we're actually going to.
No worries.
No worries. Because also Jennifer has to teach. My apologies, everybody. Jennifer Ling Datchuk was born in Warren, Ohio, and currently lives and works in San Antonio, Texas. Datchuk earned an MFA in artistry from the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth and a BFA in crafts from Kent State. She has received grants from the Artist Foundation of San Antonio, as well as ArtSpace, to research the birthplace of porcelain in Jingdezhen, China. Thank you, Jennifer. Sorry about the hiccup.
No, that's okay. Thank you so much. It's lovely being here with y'all today. I was really excited to receive this prompt because I was also working on another 100 Women, 100 Years project for NYU. So I was really excited to see how institutions were meeting this moment. And so for my two commemorative plates, I chose to honor two Chinese women. As the daughter of a Chinese immigrant, I feel like I am still trying to learn about histories that weren't taught to me in school. The first woman I honored on the plate on the left is Mabel Ping Hua Li. She is a Chinese suffragette that at the age of 16, she rode on a horseback and led women through the streets of New York City to advocate for the right to vote. That even after the 19th Amendment, we learn now and we know now that many women were not given this right, and that Chinese women were not given the right to vote until 1943. And that this was because of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act that until a few years ago was the first and only law forbidding one group of people based on race or ethnicity from entering the United States. That she really advocated for the Chinese community to promote girls' education and encourage participation in civic duties. She went on to receive her PhD in economics and was the first Chinese woman to do so from Columbia. And that I loved learning that she has a post office named after her in New York City, Chinatown, which I feel like should be a new form of tourism now, and that we should all go visit post office named after women. The second woman I chose to honor was Grace Lee Boggs, and I've been thinking about her and her work a lot recently, especially in this moment of protest and activism for Black Lives Matter. She passed away. She was a revolutionary activist, community leader, a philosopher. She collaborated 40 years with her husband, James Boggs, and they lived and worked primarily in Detroit, and that her sole activism in life was to liberate Black peoples, and that was the legacy of her work. And that thinking about her and how so much of her work has been attributed to like socialist thought, I think, why is socialism a bad thing when we have these conversations right now? That she embraced the philosophy of constant questioning of not just individuals, but local officials, and even questioning nationalist governments, and even thinking about how our governments fit within a larger global picture. All things that we should be doing now, and we are all trying to continue now. That most importantly, she believed the way to change society was to take responsibility and create opportunities for others, but most importantly, to make them feel like they're a part of something. And so I chose to honor these two through kind of not a traditional plate form, but more like a tray. I kind of saw this form as a name or a plaque that would live somewhere. That also this tray is maybe a part of a larger dinner set. But most likely when all the plates and cups and saucers are broken, these are the pieces that are left over that you kind of wonder, what do I do with this now? That I punctured their names into the porcelain in an Old English font. And then I plugged each hole with Asian human hair. And I think about the growth of hair, how it starts growing within the womb, but continues to grow in the tomb, and that it continuously moves. And I think about history in that way, is that it keeps growing. But just like now, when we're meeting these moments again, that when we cut that hair and get back to the root, we can see that it was always there. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm just going to go to your next images too, so you can give people a bit of a view of the other works that you're. Yeah.
Thanks. I work primarily in porcelain. I'm really interested in how of bringing the narratives of young women and young girls into historical objects that weren't always representative of these stories. So the Chinese Buddha for fertility always has young boys crawling all over him, but I decided to make a Buddha that was representative of how the Chinese saying that girls hold up half the sky. So I wanted a Buddha with young girls crawling on him. That we should be celebrating all of our beautiful skin colors, diversities of being biracial, mixed, and just wanting to see my diversity and representation in the objects we're surrounded with. And that as women, we are like all one tough bit. We are all one tough bitch. And that we do a lot of labor within our own bodies, but even what we do for our communities, our families, and women's labor really makes the world run. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And we can go right to Charlotte, since I've already read her bio to all of you.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
I
See me?
can. I can.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. I can hear you. Yep. And
Yeah,
oh, there you are. Now I can see you. Yep.
Great. All right. Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks very much for inviting me to participate in this wonderful exhibition. Yeah, my contribution really originates in my work as in painting, which I made very many years ago. And I made a series of paintings which were homages to women, and it was called Surfing History. And this project now has enabled me to revisit some of these ideas. And in the previous series, in fact, I made it about 20 years ago, I responded to women in history. So, for example, Queen Elizabeth I, and historical paintings. So in this project with Jennifer at the Clay Studio, I wanted to celebrate two contemporary young women, particularly because of their courage and moral position that they took in humanitarian activism. And the first plate that you see on the left is a plate about Carola Rackety. And she is a young sea captain. She's German, and she works for a non-governmental organization, a charity called Sea-Watch. And one of the things that they've been doing is they've been very involved in rescuing refugees and people who have been escaping civil war and taking boats from from North Africa across the Mediterranean to Europe. And this is a particularly European issue that's been a problem for many, many years, but especially kind of recently. And in 2019, she picked up in her boat, her Sea-Watch boat, she picked up survivors from a dinghy that was floating off the coast of Libya. And these people were escaping from the civil war in Libya. And she picked them up, but she was refused entry to dock because she didn't want to take them back to Libya because they would be in danger. And the nearest port was Lampedusa in Italy, and they let her dock for 17 days. And so there was a standoff. And she had 40 very traumatized refugees on board. And she decided that she would dock. And of course, after she docked with these refugees, she was arrested, although in fact she was released quite soon after. But what she said about this was that bringing these people to a safe place after rescuing them is by maritime law necessary. And so we broke a national law, that's the Italian law, because they had banned these boats from docking, by complying with an international one. And she said that their lives come before
Charlotte, we lost you a little bit.
And so she hoped that her gesture would lead to concrete solutions if the cities were willing to host these people. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yep, it's better now.
Okay, I've turned off the video.
Yeah, that's better. That's better.
Okay, so my second plate, the one on the right, represents a young British lawyer and activist, Melanie Strickland, who she actually, Carola worked kind of on the sea, but this was an event that took place about an aeroplane, a flight that was going to leave with an airport in the UK to forcibly repatriate a number of Africans, in fact 60 deportees, back to Nigeria, Ghana and Sierra Leone, countries that they had escaped from. And that she, together with 14 others, formed a group, and they're called the Stansted 15 because the airport was Stansted. And they, one evening, in order to prevent the aeroplane taking off with these deportees, they locked themselves to the wheel of the aeroplane. They chained themselves, and it prevented the aeroplane from leaving. And it was a way of highlighting the repatriation, which in many cases was not legal, because these people had not been given an opportunity to apply for asylum and to see whether they could stay in the United Kingdom. And in actual fact, 11 of the 60 deportees on that aeroplane still remain in England, and 6 have now got confirmed UK status. When they tied them, so they stayed all night on this on the pad, the airplane pad, and obviously it raised, it had a big impact, and there was a lot of publicity. But they were arrested, and they usually action like that is charged under quite a modest law, but they were charged under a British Act which had been instated to use against terrorist-related convictions, and that in the worst case scenario they could have got life imprisonment. Anyway, they were all convicted, and it's taken 3 years until now their appeal is going to be heard in November. So they've themselves have been under kind of enormous pressure, but obviously they feel that the sort of treatment of people fleeing and seeking a safe haven in the UK has not been sort of addressed by the government, and also they've been recognised as human rights defenders by Amnesty International. The plates themselves are actually hand painted. I am not, in fact, a ceramicist by training. I'm a fine artist by training, even though I've made a considerable body of work in ceramics over many years. And usually I work with collage and hand decal, and work with other ceramicists to make the forms. But this project, because we were in lockdown, I was unable to have access to specialized workshops and kilns. And so, driven by the imperative, obviously, to contribute to this wonderful project, I resorted to painting, which was sort of where I'd come from originally. And this process of painting directly onto the ware is actually very distinct from any other substrate like paper or canvas, because you're working with a very glassy surface, which is rather wonderful, and the paint sits on top of the china ware. And you have the paint, which has the possibility of both transparency and opacity. And you're applying it to a very sort of hard surface, which is very particular to china. And also, I think what's interesting about the hand painting is that it follows in the tradition of sort of hand painted ware, often carried out in the factories by workers who would not have considered themselves artists. And working in this way, very directly on the plate, did require me to precede it with a number of drawings and sketches in order to think quite carefully about what I wanted to do on the plates. The paintings, these paintings on the china are actually sealed with a cold glaze, which is usually associated with ceramic restoration. So that in itself, I think, is quite interesting. Yeah. So I hope that gives you a sort of idea about my contribution, and thanks very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's so inspiring to hear about all of these women who we're talking about today. And I do hope if you are able to come into the clay studio that you will do so, because I have to say that being in the room surrounded by all of these representations of women who had overcame hardships, who worked hard on behalf of others, who just are in their daily lives amazing, is quite thrilling, and makes the hair on my arm stand up with just emotion. So I hope that if you can, you do that. If not, you get a bit of that same feeling when you look through the many faces as you scroll through on the website. And I just want to show everyone, Charlotte shared a couple of other images of the other type of work that she does. This is more of the type of work that she was doing when she was a guest resident here at the Clay Studio a couple of years ago. And you can see what she meant by collaborating with ceramic artists, or working with decals or decals, as they call them over there, to achieve the images that she was looking for. Thank you again, Charlotte, for joining us all the way from England.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah.
So Mac McCusker earned an MFA in ceramics from Georgia State University. He is a former resident artist and current instructor at Odyssey Clayworks in North Carolina. Mac is a member of Art Access, the socially engaged craft collective, and he's also a full-time artist in Asheville, North Carolina. And please join us, Mac. There you go.
Hey, I got to update that resume. I just moved to Durham, North Carolina last year to accept a full-time position as the studio manager at Claymakers. That's where I am now. I've been here for a little more than a year, and still full-time working artist. And I do visit Odyssey a lot.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you.
I got a new location.
Good.
So when I was thinking about doing these plates, I really wanted to celebrate the history of the LGBTQIA population, and I kind of wanted to point out some people that I really hadn't heard of until maybe the last couple of years, and to bring people into the spotlight that just really aren't talked about. Women of color were frequently written out of history when it comes to gay rights and just in general, I suppose. So this was kind of coming from the Stonewall Revolution and Rebellion, which took place in 1969 at the Stonewall Bar And basically the police raided Stonewall Inn, and they fought back. Gay people fought back. And it started the gay revolution, and that following year was the very first gay pride parade in New York City. So there was a recent movie that came out called Stonewall that was supposed to be about that, but it completely wrote out of the story Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and the major important players in the actual rebellion, and was started, according to that movie, by a cisgender white gay man. So kind of evidence of how these things happen. So the first one is Stormy DeLavere, and she was at Stonewall. She was a female vocalist, and she had a very baritone voice, and she performed frequently at the Jewel Review, the Jewel Box Review, and they loved her voice so much, but no one believed she was a female. So they asked her to start doing some male impersonation, and she did, and she loved it, and so she continued to do that. She was actually photographed by Diane Arbus during that point in her career. And at Stonewall, she was a biracial, butch, gender nonconforming lesbian. And at Stonewall, she is believed to have thrown the first punch when the police raided the place. And it was her arrest that was the catalyst to people fighting back. And I never knew that. And I was amazed to kind of learn that, and the fact that, you know, people don't generally know who she is. She, as she got older, she was known as the guardian of the lesbians, and she frequented the area with a baseball bat to protect younger women. And she was known to, in her words, fight the ugly of the world, and she tended to protect younger people around her. So I thought she was really an amazing figure to talk about. The second one is Miss Major Griffin Gracie, and she is known as Miss Major. She is a trans activist and a community leader for transgender rights, thus focusing specifically on women of color. She was also at Stonewall, but it doesn't talk much about that. In anything I could find, it doesn't really say what role she played there, but she was there. She served as the original director of the Transgender Gender Variant Intersex Justice Project, which assists transgender individuals disproportionately incarcerated under the prison industrial complex. That organization still exists today. She's just no longer doing it. She's gotten older. She was the Grand Marshal of the Gay Pride Parade, I believe, a couple of years ago in New York City. And she wants girls to be able to be who they are, to go to school, to live their lives, not afraid or thinking that the only solution for them is death. As most people know, the murder rate of transgender women of color is incredibly high, and there have been more trans women of color murdered this year to date than there were the entirety of last year altogether. So the pandemic has apparently made it worse. So on the plate it says, "I'm still fucking here," and she coined that phrase as an empowerment statement for Black women, Black trans women, and people of color. And there's a movie that came out in 2015 called Miss Major that talks about her life. And at the end of the video, there's about 50 trans women of color that record that, and she invites people to record that message and send it to her, and then she plays it. So there's all these women saying, "I'm still fucking here," which is just really great. That's who I did. And thanks for including me.
Thanks, Matt. Note the tingles, more tingles about how amazing these women are and how just important it is to make sure that we all know about them. So thanks for bringing us two people I didn't know about before either. Super important. Thank you, Mac. Sue, are you ready? Sue Tirrell, born and raised in Red Lodge, Montana. Sue received a degree from Cuddy College in Nevada, Missouri.
Nevada.
Nevada. Okay, sorry. Thank you. And a BFA from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University in 1997. Her work has been exhibited widely in the US, Canada, and Australia, and she has taught ceramics and multimedia workshops across the country, from college classrooms to one-room schoolhouses. She lives and works in Montana's Paradise Valley. And thank you, Sue, so much for participating.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for this opportunity. And I think, like all the other artists that were involved in this project, this was a really wonderful exercise and just kind of a meditation this spring and winter, thinking about women who have inspired me and who would I pick for this project. And the list got kind of long. So I kind of stayed local to me and sort of stuck with the two women that really were probably at the top of my list from the beginning. Can you scroll forward to the photograph of the woman on the balcony? Thank you. I wanted to just make a note that I did choose two women for my plates. However, one of my plates succumbed to a ceramic casualty, so I didn't send it. But I did make a plate commemorating Jeanette Rankin, who's the first woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1916. She's from Montana, from Missoula, Montana. Women were given equal suffrage in Montana in 1914, so women had the right to vote in Montana before women nationally, and I should say non-Native women were given the right to vote. Native American women and men were not allowed to vote until 1924. But Jeanette was elected in 1916 and was served one term, did not win re-election, in part due to some redistricting and also a very unpopular stance against entering World War I. So after she left the U.S. House, she continued to work for the rights of women and children and workers until 1940, when she ran for the House again and was elected, and then was the only person who voted against entering World War II. She was a lifelong pacifist and really believed that that we shouldn't be asking people to fight if women weren't fighting at that time, and she didn't feel like she could ask anyone else to go to war on her behalf. So she took very unpopular stance, but she was very she felt very strongly about peace. And in fact, she threatened to run for the House again in the 60s to try to end the war in Vietnam. So that was her lifelong work, was pacifism and rights for women and children and workers. So I think Montana women are very proud of Jeanette, and I really was happy to commemorate her on a plate. I'm sorry that it didn't see the light of day. But I wanted to just talk about her briefly before I talk about my other two plates. So these are the photographs that I based my plates on. They were taken by Evelyn Cameron, who's seated on the horse in the middle in this picture. She was a high-born English lady who moved to Montana in the late 1800s, 1894. She moved to Montana with her husband to raise polo ponies for export back to Europe. It was a project that, as you can probably imagine, didn't work out very well. Most of the horses died on the voyage or soon after getting back to England, so they pretty much lost all their money in that endeavor. But Evelyn was a very resourceful woman. She was, like I mentioned before, she was a high-born lady. She came from a fairly wealthy family, well-connected family in England. And when she got to Montana, she just kind of blossomed into this very capable, rugged, handy sort of person. And because of their failed business attempts, she really turned to her own resourcefulness to make their farm and ranch work. Living in this very desolate, remote part of the West in eastern Montana, she raised an acre garden, which she not only used to sustain herself and her husband year-round, but also sold in the local town and also gave to people who were in need. She also was kind of the person that people would call on if they had trouble. There was a great story I read in a book about her recently where a rancher had some cattle that were stranded on an island in a river that was flooding, and the cattle were going to drown, and he didn't know how to swim and how to get over to the cattle. So she put on her bathing suit, which I can't imagine what that looked like in the early 1900s, and made lunch for the rancher who was in distress, and then swam back and forth through the river to rescue 12 cattle one at a time. And so she was just the kind of person that people called on to do, to help, or she would just offer her help and her skills. She broke horses, she branded cattle, she could hunt and skin, game and preserve game. And she was just a person that you wanted to have on your side. The picture that's being shown right now is a picture of her wearing a split skirt, which is one of my favorite pictures of her. She, like I said before, she was very practical. And so as soon as she got in Montana, she realized that riding side saddle was just not practical. She had to ride many miles just to get to town, and sitting side saddle on a horse was not easy to do, especially the kind of horses that they were riding in Montana. They weren't well trained necessarily. So she was practical. She found this split skirt and started wearing it, and was immediately told that she was going to be arrested if she didn't put on proper clothing. So she did it anyway. And many women around her ended up, adopting the split skirt style of riding to make life easier. And I think, why I chose her is I've loved her images for so long. Growing up in Montana, I worked in a museum that collected some of her work, and I really connected to her as a horse person and as a person living in rural Montana. But I think after thinking more about her and about the time that we're living in right now, what I've gotten from her and her life is that she was a really good neighbor, and that's really what I want to be in this time. I want to be a person that, no matter what your political persuasion is or who you are, I want to be able to, I want people to approach me, and I want to be helpful to my community, whether or not we see eye to eye on, a variety of topics. So that's really kind of what I took from her and why I wanted to commemorate her on these plates. So thanks for including me.
Thank you, Sue.
Yeah.
That was great. I love those old photographs. And again, just to share our stories about the people who we've found throughout history who are inspiring to us. And your last comment about being a good neighbor is really touching and important for right now. I wholeheartedly agree with you. That's if we could all start there, we would be in a better position right now. But those of us around this table are there, so we just have to extend that instinct that we have to those who are surrounding us. Please vote in November. Yeah. And so we will end have our last speaker is Mallory Wetherill, but we will be able to keep talking and chatting a bit afterwards. If people, again, if you have questions for a specific artist, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we can hang out a little afterwards. Mallory Wetherill is a native of South Carolina, currently an assistant professor of art and the head of ceramics at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. She earned her BFA. Whenever I read people's bios, I always change received to earned, because we earned these degrees in ceramics from the University of South Carolina in 2006, and her Master's of Fine Arts in Ceramics from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth in 2010. Oops, there we go. Thank you, Mallory.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, everybody. And thanks so much for this prompt. I think just with COVID and everything, I just have not really felt very creative. And so to sort of receive this assignment, I was very happy for it and very honored to be included. And like Syd mentioned earlier, I think this has become sort of a creative catalyst for some of my work moving forward. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, so I'll start with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She seemed like an obvious choice when I was sort of trying to decide who I wanted to commemorate on these plates. And obvious to the point where I almost didn't choose her because I didn't want to have to, I didn't want to repeat women. But then I started thinking, gosh, we all could make a show probably by ourselves and not overlap, because there's been so many amazing people throughout time who just who deserve to have our respect. So anyway, I went with Ruth Bader first because she's been a steadfast advocate for the advancement of gender equality and women's rights for decades now. She was the second female Supreme Court justice. She was the first Jewish female Supreme Court justice, and she's currently the longest standing Jewish justice ever, male or female. And then she's become an icon for women empowerment. People jokingly refer to her as the notorious RBG because she's fiery. But what I really like about her is she's smart and articulate, but she can disagree without becoming nasty. Like, it doesn't become a personal attack. She's very well educated in how she talks about her decisions and where her decisions come from. And, in this time of the nasty woman, she's definitely not that. She's classy. And, I love her various uses of I think they're called the jabbets, the collars that they wear. And so she pulls on different cultures for different occasions in wearing them. And then I chose the one that she wears. It's called her dissent collar because she wears it when she is trying to quietly, let everybody know she disagrees. And, she might not have a voice in that moment, but that's her way. So she's using fashion, as a way of communication. So I thought she just definitely needed to be included in this show. And then the second plate, it took me so long to decide who I wanted to do because personally, I feel very lucky to have really strong females in my family. And so I kind of wanted to do something personal, but ultimately I went with Dolly Parton because she is an American icon. She's recognizable. She's a cultural icon. She's an amazing poet, and her poetry and songwriting has been timeless. But one of the things I really admire about Dolly Parton is she's always been unapologetically herself. She has this great quote of saying, it's so expensive to look this cheap, and I love that she owns who she is. But she's also a great philanthropist. She does a lot for literacy, and she's a great advocate. And her work has really she's been able to connect with individuals across political, religious, and social barriers. And I think we need more people like that who can appeal to the masses. And she's funny, and she has also been an advocate for women's issues with infertility. And I think that that's something as women, we carry a lot of shame sometimes with that. And I think to have somebody in the spotlight talk about their own issues, it's empowering for other women. So those were the two I chose, and I felt really honored to make work about them. I want to keep going because it was so fun to do these plates. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mallory. I just wanted to also show a couple of other images that you shared with me because they're so powerful, and everyone should see some other pieces of your work. Do you want to briefly talk about these?
Sure, yeah. So my work has always been anatomical and autobiographical in nature. I've always used the human body to sort of address issues regarding particularly gender. A few years ago, I started working on a collection of vessels that sort of depicted imagery from my life as a woman and things that are stereotypically female. And I called this collection, they're about a collection, so this is 4 of maybe 50 vessels that were sort of shown on one big kind of altar. And they were called Communion. And it wasn't in reference to religion necessarily, but rather the sharing or exchanging of intimate thoughts and feelings. And it was a way for me to sort of address the complex feelings I have towards being a woman, both feelings of empowerment and sometimes thoughts of self-deprecation, you know. And I used the vessel particularly as a canvas to not only reference the human body as a vessel, but also to address the sort of psychological containment of being a woman, to convey that we're oftentimes biologically bound to certain rituals. Like in the next piece, I think, this piece with the tweezers, it was about you know, removing so-called unwanted hair. And, you know, we're mammals and we all have hair, and like men, we get it all over our bodies. You know, so to one viewer, this might view as an offering of the tool necessary to remove that hair. But to another viewer, it actually might be a receptacle for this cast off for women who are like, fuck that, I don't want to do this anymore. And so here, have my tweezers and be done. Yeah, and so this was a really fun series for me to do. Alongside this series, I had a series of the ceramic work. I showed it alongside a series of 5 large drawings. And so I included one of these with Jennifer, and they're drawings on paper. And it was I've worked for years with the human body, and I just had never actually drawn the human body. I never took a life drawing class. And so it became an exercise, you know, a technical exercise for me. But I also really wanted to draw these things from a really personal, severely personal point of view. I mean, that is some weird perspective in these drawings. And I formatted them in a circular fashion to sort of talk about that microscope that we have on ourselves and that sort of tunnel vision that we get. And I blurred the edges of these drawings to allude to that physical and psychological periphery that sort of skews our perception of self. And what I mean by that is I just, you know, throughout history, the human body, especially the female body, has been put on display, you know, for glorification and sexualization. We've been taught to openly look at it, and I think more negatively to freely analyze it. And we're guilty of doing, I mean, I know as a female, I'm guilty of doing it myself, and I see the problems in it. So I think that as a result of all this, the idea that we as women can look at ourselves clearly and uninhibited is totally unrealistic, because we're subconsciously imprinted from history and society. And I think it skews, you know, our idea of self. So yeah, so that's sort of where my work has been. I don't exactly know where it's going. I'm definitely playing around with a lot of new stuff in the studio. But it definitely has to do with this idea of these like really real, honest depictions of the female body. And, you know, I just want my work to be a way of sort of having this conversation with representing larger groups of women and sort of lifting each other up instead of, you know, always comparing ourselves against each other. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mallory. That was wonderful. And so important also to remember that we should also celebrate ourselves when we're celebrating all these other amazing people throughout history. I just want to briefly say, have you ever looked at the work of Melanie Belenker? She is a jewelry maker. She uses human hair, so Ling Datchuk to take note, and she uses, she makes line drawings that are very intimate, kind of like your drawings.
I do know what you're talking about. I had somebody who shared her work with me, but I couldn't recall her name, so I just wrote it down.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm just going to note, everyone, if you want to check in the chat, we have some great comments from people, as well as a note about a talk that's happening tomorrow. So look at that in a bit. And also, in addition to that link, which is Garth Johnson and the Everson, thank you, Leslie, for putting that link in. If you all ever wonder what's going on in Zoom World in Ceramics, Studio Potter has a calendar up on their website. And if you have an event that you want to list with them, all you have to do is add going to say it wrong, but I think it's thestudiopotter@gmail.com to your Google Calendar thingy, and it'll automatically populate onto their, did you like that, Mac? I was very eloquent of me to say thingy. Anyway, you can get your listing up there, and then if you want to see what else is going on, you can look at their calendar. It's really helpful because there's so many amazing programs going on really every hour of every day. And let's go over to the chat. We have Patsy saying, beautiful content, Syd. So thrilled to hear you talk about your work. Bravo, fantastic. Raymond says, Charlotte, what harrowing stories. What a statement about these women's bravery. Roberta says, incredibly interesting. So glad to know more about these two women. Thanks, Mac. Pretty powerful stuff. That's from Patsy. Thank you, Mac. Awesome, from Kathy. Raymond says, a running theme in these artists' work is the idea of women as protectors, protectors of other stories and histories, of those most vulnerable, protectors of ideas and convictions. Josie's saying she loves it. Marilyn says, thank you, she has to go. Roberta, phenomenal viewpoints and interpretations generated by this plate project. Each artist has taken this project to heart and run with it. So exciting to see the individual interpretations coupled with background for personal selection in this presentation. So informative regarding such individual courage and accomplishments by these women. And of course, Roberta is one of the artists in the show. Thank you, Roberta. Patsy, really happy to know the story behind the plates. Sue, well told. And then Rebecca Sive was telling us about the presentation tomorrow. She is doing a study session with Garth Clark regarding women's ceramics collection. I hope those who are interested will join. Our special guest will be Anne Lewis, who will share pieces of ceramics from her collection of suffragist work and ephemera. And then there's a link. And there's Leslie put the link to the Studio Potter calendar. Thank you, Leslie. Great program. Oh, thank you, Helen. Fabulous. Thank you for sharing. If anyone wants to take themselves off mute and make a comment, that would be welcome. I know some people do have to leave. I think Jennifer has to teach, and maybe Sue or not, I don't know. But if you want to hang around for maybe 5 more minutes, I just wanted to reiterate a nice, interesting conversation we had yesterday in our test call, which was, you know, I'm so steeped in decorative arts history and craft history that the idea of the plate as this very powerful object that carries, that we use them to feed ourselves. They have been used for 300 or more years to kind of celebrate events and people and histories. I think that I'm sometimes too happily in my bubble of not thinking about maybe how the outside art world or the lay people, the non-art people think about plates. But someone brought up to me the other day, did anyone push back about the idea of putting these women on plates? Did anyone feel like that was going to be, you know, too domestic, or kind of making these ideas, you know, devaluing the art, the work, or the art, the women that are being represented? And again, to me, that wasn't an issue, but I was really interested to talk to some of the other artists. Does anyone want to maybe reiterate some comments from yesterday, or anyone else in the audience, feel free.
Well, oh, Charlotte.
Hi. Is that?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of, in a way, it's kind of partly a dilemma, but I think it's very exciting that plates, as I said yesterday, plates are so everyday. And I think that it's really interesting to link them to women, because we have been so much the ones who have, as I think you mentioned, you know, we've been the ones who've been serving the dinner, washing the dishes, you know, cleaning up. And I think that women's work has been very much linked to domesticity and to the plate. And so I think it's interesting that the plate then becomes a commemorative object. So it's very different. So I think the kind of combination of elevating the plate to a substrate, which is space for commemoration is really interesting, because the plate still maintains this reference to domesticity in women's work.
Yeah.
So congratulations. I think it's brilliant, really.
Thank you. That's very generous of you. And as you're talking about domesticity and tradition, I'm looking at Raymond, who's chosen a 1950s living room as his background. So it's kind of funny. Oh, there, thank you. Now we can see the TV. Mallory,
well, I was just going to say, sort of talking about that serving and the idea of dinnerware, you know, it brings me back to the table as a way of providing conversation. You know, they talk about the importance of family dinners, and that's where communication happens. And so that's what this show is. It's communicating the stories of all of these women. And I mean, I didn't know half the women that were being honored on these plates. And so, you know, it's informative. And I think that's, you know, sort of ties back to the dinner plate specifically. So I thought it was a great canvas to work with. It's a doable canvas. Like so many other artists, I had other ones made that didn't make it. And, you know, it's just, that's our medium, but it wasn't like having us build an entire sculpture that didn't work, you know? So, you know, I appreciated the plate as a canvas.
Well, and to that point about, I know Kathy King also had maybe I shouldn't call people out by name, but other people had to kind of reinterpret and shift plans because of that whole, what someone said so eloquently once to me, that the kiln will break your heart. But I've heard everyone say like, oh, maybe I'm gonna make more plates. And in my mind, I think like, oh, you know, this is so great, but it's only gonna be up for a certain amount of time. And I would love for there to be a way that this kind of project has a longer life. So maybe as you make those other plates, you could still tag us or something on your social media so we can see how the project grows, and anyone else who's interested in following the prompt. I think Syd had something that she wanted to say.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out that probably one of the most iconic works of art that is on exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum is Judy Chicago's Dinner Party, in which she takes this on in this so elaborate and in-your-face kind of way. And so I just think that, you know, as a follow-up to that, we're kind of echoing that effort that happened well over, I mean, I don't know when she made it, 30 years ago, perhaps. But, you know, I see this whole notion of should we be concerned that we're using plates? I think that's an old, tired concern. We are certainly claiming our activity as women. We're taking on those so-called female arts and female practices and putting them out there as this is what, you know, these are important ways of making and expressing ourselves. And so the whole notion of asking that question is, well, we've already dealt with that. Why is that still a question?
Great, I like that answer. I'm gonna go with that one.
I have to admit that I try not to put any decoration. Like usually my work is like so over the top decorative but that a plate I wanted to like make not decorative, which is weird, but like to be like, so obviously I was self-conscious about connotations, and I've never worked on a flat form like that. So that was really cool. And I also want to throw and say that the person that was one of the figures of my plate was on our chat here. Her name is Chris Moore, and she's very involved in helping me know the history of the anti-Vietnam War protests and the Vietnam veterans against the war. And without her and her husband, I would not be, I don't think I would feel the responsibility of doing art the way I do. So I wanted to say something. So okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane. Well, I hope that the two of you join us for and to speak at one of the future. We'll talk later about when that might be possible. And then to hear it was Sue who said that, wait, now I'm getting confused. Yeah, who her, the woman she chose who didn't get on the plate was an anti-war activist and almost ran again in the 60s. That was so interesting, against the Vietnam War when she was, you know,
That was a really good
protesting
one.
World War I and Vietnam. That's pretty cool to think
Yeah.
about, living through that period. Stephanie, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say that what I loved about this assignment was harking back to my days as a book illustrator, which I did full time for the longest time and had a wonderful career, but it was so lonely being, you know, solitary, but with kids, and then they go off and to school and so on. So I just loved working with my two women who are local musicians. And they were my art directors, harking back to my years as an illustrator, where I worked with designers and art directors for children's books and cookbooks and all kinds of stuff, fun stuff. So I love this assignment because it gave me a chance to work directly with my two women, and hopefully you'll see them when they successfully come out of my second firing. Thank you very much for this honor. And I'm so impressed with all of you. Your works are just gorgeous. Wow. Wow.
Thanks,
That's
Steph.
all I have to say for now.
Thank you. That's great. Well, that was a lovely comment, and I think we can end there unless there's anyone who has a burning last comment that they want to make.
I just wanted to say, Jennifer, your planning and scheduling of this last night as I was watching the convention and Obama speaking from Philadelphia, my heart swelled thinking about all of the people in this show making these plates in that time, culminating, you know, last night for me. So I just wanted to say that real quick. Thank you for your timing. It's just, I don't know how you planned this.
Well, thanks, Patsy. It happened to be that the anniversary, I mean, I planned it for the anniversary, and it was just a coincidence that that was the same as the convention. And I was doing the same thing last night, watching and thinking about the room with all the those plates in it. So I'm so glad that you felt the same way, and that we're all sharing this experience. And that's really what being a good neighbor, sharing experiences, building our community, and supporting each other is what we're trying to do.
Will you be showing the plates in the gallery?
They're already in the gallery.
I know. Will you on a Zoom? I don't go anyplace.
Yes, next week that is on the agenda. Thank you, Roberta. I definitely will do that. And so just before we leave, I want to remind you all that please join us if you'd like again next week to hear more artists. I will walk around the gallery so you can see them installed. We're also going to, fingers crossed, have a historian of African-American women's voting rights be able to join us, maybe not next week, but hopefully in a few weeks, or maybe at our closing Zoom, which is going to be on, I want to say September 25th, but I'm not sure about that exact date right at the moment. So we'll be able to have a real kind of deep dive into the history of what happened with women's voting rights kind of from 1848 until today. Because I think it's another opportunity for all of us to really understand that full history. Thank you again.
Yeah. Jennifer, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Do you have plans to put this together as a catalog? Because it's just such great documentation from each of these stories.
That is a great question, Leslie. So Raymond Rourke, who's with us today, our amazing graphic designer, has designed a gallery guide. He has okay, Raymond, do you want to design it? So and that'll be available.
I would love to.
As a PDF, so I guess we add the images, and then it's a really PDF that people could take, and maybe we'll think about how to get it print on demand. That's a great, thank you, Leslie. And that's quite a compliment for us.
Oh my gosh, it's so, like every one of these stories that were told today, I know there's, one for every single plate. And, it's a history lesson, it's an art lesson, it's a reflection on these times. And, it's in honor of, all this hard work that you've been doing and led up to this moment. So congratulations, it's a fabulous, I hope it travels and I hope it builds interest for Clay Studio, and I hope you sell a lot of things to make money for yourselves and pay for a catalog.
Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah.
I hope so too. And so just in the interim, anyone can go on the website, and every one of the artists wrote an artist statement and a story about the plates, and they're all up there. So it's available, but I take it as a compliment and a prompt to move forward to get that into a PDF format. Thank you, Leslie. And maybe you can write an introductory essay for it.
Well, having lived through 4 months of a women's only show with 12 women, I know how much work has gone into this to deal with 100 women plates and probably 50 artists. I didn't catch how many total, but it's so much work, and thank you for taking it on.
Well, thank you, Leslie. And Leslie and Lauren Mabry are going to be joining us at a future Zoom, probably in the fall, speaking of women and your project. So we're excited about that as well.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
We'll see you next week, I hope. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for joining us.
Bye. Thanks very much.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's wonderful.
It's so nice to have you with us. Bye, Syd.
Pleasure.
Bye. Thank you, Jennifer.
Let's talk about again soon. Okay, bye. Bye, Raymond.
Thank you.
Bye.